is week 2. We are talking boundaries. We are talking where your time goes. We are talking about getting back in touch with yourself and the things that you want to do, the things that you love, the things that you're kind of desiring that would really nourish you. I think it's going to be an interesting week because we're going to start to identify where are the blockers to all of this stuff and get back in touch with that slightly numbed part of ourselves that maybe hasn't got attention for a while, but is actually kind of going, hey, I'm here and these are the things that light me up. And I want to do those things. And we're going to try and uncover a little bit of her inside us. So let's dive into what we're going to do. Hey team, so we are back. It is week 2. And this week in The Artist Way is actually titled Recovering a Sense of Identity. And I think what's interesting from reading the chapter in The Artist Way is what really comes up to me is kind of like there's 2 main areas that Julia Cameron is trying to help us get into. And one that is the understanding of the external, the outside effects that we have that are perhaps keeping us blocked, which really she's mostly talking about where are we spending our time and who is taking that time from us in terms of like the people around us that are keeping us in a rhythm that is blocked and not going to support our creative growth. And I think is an interesting one to face into, right? Because some of the fears that come up when we start to try and make changes are that idea, and she puts it in here, of people be particularly alert to any suggestion that you've become selfish or different. And I think as a mother, as a woman, the idea that you might be selfish by putting yourself first, so to speak, I think is a really tough one because it's very culturally surrounding of us, right? There are so many stories about what a good mother is like and how they share their time and what priority they place themselves in. And I think that whole idea of priorities, the fact that the idea that you prioritize your child over yourself, like it sort of doesn't make sense because we all know, if we really think about it, that there isn't a pecking order of like child, then partner, then me, or child, then me, then my relationship, or, you know, all of those things. Is kind of like as a family, if you're not doing well as the mum, if you're not prioritizing your needs, then nobody else's needs are getting met in the way that they need to be, right? Because how do we show up and mother when we can't mother ourselves, when we can't nourish and look after ourselves? And I think just trying to remember from the start that as we step into uncomfortable changes, perhaps that I actually think the biggest barrier is going to be how we feel from the inside about making these changes rather than the outside. But there is also a very good chance that we might have other people from the outside, other mothers, other parents, maybe we're changing the kind of landscape of how we work with our partner, how we co-parent with them, what that looks like, you know, what your own mother did for you, all of those things that perhaps could be blockers that might come up. And she kind of talks about being really aware of those people who aren't going to be helping you in your recovery, because for them it kind of, they don't really want you to change, they want things to stay as they are. And I think that's a really interesting thing to start to recognize, of like, who are the people who can help you create space, that can help you champion this change and can help you champion this journey of nourishing yourself, of healing, of allowing space for creativity, of something that is important for you and considering that a need that is important, that is met, rather than this like frivolous thing that's on top, like, oh yeah, you were creative, cool, rather than like, actually creativity is our lifeblood, right? Creativity is the thing that runs through us. So I think it's really important to recognize that we need to make space to explore who those people are that are supporting, and maybe recognize those people that aren't that helpful, and maybe we need to draw a little bit of a boundary around the time that we spend with them, about what we share with them on our journey. So we don't need to cut them out, but maybe we don't want them to compromise our journey, in which case we give them less access to what we're doing, what we're thinking, and how we're going about it. So that was one of the big things I think for me to come out, was this idea of like, who and where is your time going, and then how do you look to start setting boundaries around that? Not even necessarily being like, this is my boundary, I'm going to communicate it down, but also just recognizing where our boundaries are being crossed so we can start to figure out how might we go about changing that. And then the other part that she calls into is our own sense of self, our own connection to self. And she talks about external blockers, which are time and people from her perspective. But then there's also this internal blocker of how we feel about the fact that we're starting to make change. And she kind of says, look out for self sabotage this week. Look out for starting to feel like, oh, but I did that last week, but that was just a one off, or I couldn't possibly do it all the time, or like it wasn't very good, or maybe I only created good art that week because of X, Y, and Z. Um, and she says this line, which I think is really important: we still feel too much like frauds to handle some success. And I think it's interesting to recognize that this week is kind of about starting to just pay attention to that self-talk a bit more, starting to pay attention to who we are, what identity we formed, and what identity we want to have. And I think what a lovely quote that I really liked from this is she starts talking about skepticism and how we might feel skeptical that actually this is going to do anything, right? It's like we've had one good week, but really, can we keep it up? Is it really going to make any difference? Like, aren't we just going to put all this effort in and then end up back where we were? And she says, setting skepticism aside, even briefly, can make for very interesting explorations. In creative recovery, it is not necessary that we change any of our beliefs, it's necessary that we examine them. And I think that's so powerful because we have probably built by now all sorts of beliefs around who we are as a mother, who we are in our family, how we are a creative when we're a mother. And I know if you saw my video last week about how I felt about the creative recovery, how like what happened for me, one of the big things that came out was this tension between what I thought my role should be as a mother and how I thought creativity got in the way of that. So that's something that I need to keep examining. But I think that is another thing that as we start to get silent and focus on ourselves, will be interesting to see how that comes up. So the final element and the way I think she suggests we get in touch with ourselves is this idea of attention. And I just want to read two quotes from this area on attention because I think it is for me really inspiring and I've drawn around them and I've starred them. And the first one is, the quality of life is in proportion always to the capacity for delight. The capacity for delight is the gift of paying attention. And it reminded me of this idea that we have this baseline of happiness that we always come back to. And the thing that I heard as a way to keep raising that baseline is this idea that we can say, these are the days, these are the good days. And the more we repeat that to ourselves every day, we start to essentially increase this capacity for delight, increase this happiness level. And I think that shortcut idea of paying attention is going to be one of the things that helps us find delight in the world, is a really beautiful idea. And the other thing she says, which I think is super powerful, is the reward for attention is always healing. It may begin as the healing of a particular pain, the lost lover, the sickly child, the shattered dream. But what is healed finally is the pain that underlies all pain, the pain that we are all, as Rilke phrases it, unutterably alone. More than anything else, attention is an act of connection. I learned this the way I've learned most things, quite by accident. And I think that that idea that when we pay attention, we are connected is a beautiful one. It's one of the reasons that I actually love wonder. And I talk a lot about wonder in my work because I think that the idea that we can marvel at something, that we can pay attention to it in real detail, to actually pause and look, and the connection we feel to the world and to other people that comes from that is so powerful in a world that we've been living in, where a lot of us are parenting alone or parenting in these nuclear families, or we are kind of cut off from our larger families or our community, or we feel that our goal is our individual goal and it needs to be put first above everything else. And I think that reminder that two can go hand in hand, that we can meet our own needs, that we can put our requirements kind of at the top of our list, but it doesn't have to come at the cost of everybody else, because in fact it is connection. It is the more we show up as a delighted, energized, creative person, the more everybody else benefits from that, because that energy is kind of contagious. um, and so I think those are the kind of key points of this week, are to start recognizing, start paying attention to where we are, what we feel, how we're doing, and to take note of where our time goes and who our time goes into. And if any of those things aren't aligned with what we want. Tasks for this week. Morning pages, if we can do them, let's see how they go. Second, artist date. And for me this week, my personal take is going to be to have a bit of an analog evening. So each week with my partner, we each have an evening that is kind of ours to take, to meet friends, to go to an exercise class, to leave the house and basically not be on kid duty. And I actually think I'm going to use my partner's evening to be alone in the house and sit down with some coffee table books and my notebook and sketchbook and just write and draw and flick through and listen to a cool soundtrack and not turn on any screens and just have an analog evening. So I will try and take you along with me for that and see how it goes. But I challenge you to pick one of those artist dates from your list from last week and see if you can slot it into the week. And then the other tasks that I think are really great for this week, I think there are quite a few this week. So I'm going to give you some suggestions and you can take what feels good and leave what doesn't. But one was doing a track of where your time goes. List the 5 major activities this week. How much time did you give to each one? What were things you wanted to do? What were things that you should do or felt like you had to? How much of your time is spent helping others and ignoring your own desire? And I think just recognizing that line of what is gifted to other people, what is necessary to be gifted to other people, and what actually can be kept back for you is super important. And just starting to keep a note of where does that time go. And then the second activity, list 20 things you enjoy doing. Literally just write a list of 1 to 20 and anything you enjoy doing. So she gives examples: rock climbing, roller skating, baking pies, making soup, making love, riding a bike, riding a horse, playing catch, shooting baskets, going for a run, reading poetry, etc., etc. 20 things that you like doing. And then put a date by each one of when the last time you did them, and see if, I mean, they might have been a while ago, and see if you can maybe select one of those ideas to be your artist date for the week. And then the final thing that I think is really nice to do is to, actually, there's 2 more I want to quickly share. So one is a life pie. So you draw a circle and divide it into 6 pieces, like 6 pieces of pie. And these are kind of the extra areas of life, I guess I would say, the non-organizational, necessary, functional bits, which are arguably very important to us functioning, but maybe they're the bits that have been ignored a bit. So one area, spirituality, the next exercise, the next play, the next work, friends and family, and then romance and adventure. And put a dot on each part of the circle as to the degree to which you're fulfilled in that area. So the smaller the circle is less fulfillment. The larger the circle is more fulfillment. And just chart where you are. And I think this is a pie that we can keep coming back to say like, hey, am I super unbalanced? And maybe that's an area that I can put a bit of focus on when I get a bit of time. Or maybe that's an area that I can put a focus on for my artist date. And then the final challenge, again, I really like this because I think it's about getting in touch with you and what's going on in your brain, was 10 tiny changes. List 10 changes you'd like to make for yourself, from the significant to the small, or vice versa. E.g., get new sheets, or have another set of china, paint my kitchen, dump my bitchy friend Alice. Who knows what Alice did, but clearly she upset Julia some way. But you do it in this way. You write, I would like to, and then you write down 10 things, small things that you would like to do, 10 tiny things. Because I think that's the final theme for me that comes out of this week is, can we take tiny, tiny actions? Can we do that 1% of change, like the easiest possible thing that we could do that's slightly different, to see if we can move forward and create space? And so if you found morning pages hard, if you didn't manage to go on artist date, if you've not had any time for the activities, maybe just see what, like, can you just make 5 minutes this week to do something that you didn't do last weekend? Maybe it's just one day where you do 5 minutes and you do a morning page, or one day where you do 5 minutes in, do one of these exercises that calls out to you, because even just doing the one thing rather than having to do it all, I think is what starts to create change and make changes. So that's the brief for the week. I've decided, because of time, I'm not going to do a check-in every single week on how I've been doing. So I'm going to do 2 weekly check-ins, because I can't make 2 YouTube videos every week on top of work and parenting and trying to actually do the creative recovery. But I do want to take you along for the journey. So I will share in a couple of weeks' time the last 2 weeks and what I've been doing. But I hope that you can join me this week. I would love to hear how it's going. You can join me over on Substack if you want to chat there and share more about this week's challenges. But I look forward to checking back in soon, and I hope you have a creative week.